In ancient Greece, the moon goddess Artemis knocks an arrow and signals to her band of sworn maiden hunters as her twin brother Apollo rides his sun chariot across the sky. In Scandinavia, the one-eyed Norse god Odin stalks the world of Midgard, seeking the famed mead of poetry, which will transform the drinker into one of the most knowledgeable among all skalds and scholars. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Isis collects all the pieces of her murdered husband Osiris's body and reassembles him so that she can conceive a son, Horus. Do you ever wonder what happened to stories like these? Why this kind of tale was only told by the ancients? Why there's no new mythology? Well, the answer to that is, of course, that there is. Pick up any novel from the fantasy section of your local bookstore and you'll likely find some kind of mythology that forms the basis of its fictional world. In fact, thanks to the internet, there are probably more mythologies now than there ever have been at any point in human history. What a wonderful time we live in. But that's not actually what you meant, is it? You're not here wondering about fictional mythologies from fictional worlds, are you? You probably want to know about the real deal. Myths like the ones I mentioned just a moment ago. What happened to them? Will we ever see people telling genuine stories like that again? You almost have to wonder, is mythology dead? One of the best things in life is learning, which is probably why you're here to begin with. Unfortunately, not everyone learns the same. Public school is not a one-size-fits-all option, and I don't really think it ever can be. As a result, a lot of us creative types end up missing out on a lot of precious education. Fortunately, there is a shockingly easy, fun, and highly personalized way to get an education right from home. Learn all of your fundamentals, maths, sciences, computer programming, and more with our sponsor, Brilliant. Visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry to get 30 days for free and 20% off a year subscription. Seriously, this is the most fun you'll probably ever have learning this stuff. Try it out for free and be as brilliant as I know that you can be. The first problem with that question is that a lot of mythology is actually just religion. People weren't just using the sun chariot of Apollo as a metaphor for the rising and the setting of the sun. They actually believed that that was what was happening. And, as tends to be the case with most religion, expressing your skepticism of these beliefs was not exactly appreciated. Just ask Socrates. You may have noticed, though, that we don't call modern religious stories myths. That would feel pretty rude, wouldn't it? That's because the term myth has another meaning, something that isn't true, or at the very least whose veracity is dubious. The show Mythbusters, videos promising to debunk the top 10 weight loss myths, that sort of thing. Not the implication you usually want to make about somebody else's deeply held beliefs. So, we tend to reserve the term myth for the dead religions, the gods who don't have anyone left to feel offended for them. But when you ask why there's no new mythologies, you probably aren't asking about religions either, are you? Because there are new religions popping up every single day. A lot of those are what we would call cults, and if you're looking for information on how to start one, Foundry is probably not the YouTube channel you're looking for. So, if not gods from fictional worlds and not religions, then what exactly are we even talking about here? Let's get academic for a sec. The term myth itself comes from the ancient Greek word mythos, and it referred to any thought, idea, or story delivered by way of spoken word. But of course, language changes, and the word itself has obviously evolved beyond that. Very few people would argue that a myth stops being a myth when it's written down, and even fewer would probably argue that anything spoken aloud is, by definition, a myth. Even experts tend to have a hard time defining what a myth is. Finnish folklorist Lauri Honko refers to it as a story of the gods, a religious account of the beginning of the world, the creation, fundamental events, the exemplary deeds of the gods as a result of which the world, nature, and culture were created. Spanish myth criticism professor José Manuel Losada calls it a functional, symbolic, and thematic narrative of one or several extraordinary events with a transcendent, sacred, and supernatural referent, that lacks, in principle, historical testimony, and that refers to an individual or collective, but always absolute, cosmogony or eschatology. Wikipedia very simply defines it as a folklore genre consisting of narratives that play a fundamental role in a society. These are all different definitions, but they have some important elements in common. A myth seems to be a story that is very important to a certain culture, that explains why the world is the way it is, and has some supernatural religious aspect. Not a perfect definition, but good enough to start working toward an answer to the question we really want. Is myth, in fact, dead? And if so, what killed it? I think the easiest go-to answer here is, surprise, surprise, science. Centuries after the Enlightenment, people no longer need to explain away the sun as the wheel of Apollo's chariot. We know what makes the sun rise in the east and set in the west. There are still a handful of people who worship Apollo, but I doubt even most of them believe in this story literally, the way that the ancients did. After all, people have access to telescopes now. You can just go check. But science is only one of the reasons for myth's decline. It also just sort of comes down to how people tell stories now. It's easy to take it for granted, but the concept of fiction itself hasn't been around forever. Most stories in antiquity were told with at least a veneer of plausibility. The teller would claim to believe it, and so would the audience. There was no specific term for stories that the teller admitted were untrue, that the audience accepted were untrue, and which were told for entertainment purposes anyway. To them, that would have just been a complicated way of lying. You can see this in the way that many ancient legends mix mythology and history. The Trojan War could very possibly have happened, but was Achilles really there? And was he actually invincible because he was dipped in the river Styx as a baby? Probably not. It's very common for the exploits of real heroes to become attributed to gods, and, on the other hand, in cultures like Ireland, traditional gods are downgraded to the status of fairies and metaphors, sometimes even just legendary rulers. In the case of Ireland, a lot of this to avoid accusations of idolatry after much of the population was converted to Christianity. Catholicism's Saint Bridget, for instance, shares a suspicious number of similarities to the ancient Irish fire goddess of the same name. So there's science and there's fiction. There's also one more very important concept blocking the development of new mythologies: canonicity. Before literacy became more commonplace, most tales were spread orally, mythos in its original form, and that had a couple of different effects. The first is that no one knows who came up with these stories originally because it wasn't written down anywhere. It's basically just rumors, gossip, the longest game of telephone ever. And the second major effect is that nobody knows how much these stories have changed over time as they've been passed from person to person with no way to compare who told what version of the story when or how they changed. Those two factors make something very important possible. These stories do not belong to anyone because they cannot belong to anyone. The closest thing you can really say is that they belong to a culture, and even that is pretty dubious, as stories are known to be passed back and forth across borders and peoples all the time. These days, we basically have paper trails for everything we make. We even have copyright laws to protect the intellectual property of creators. No one can profit off a story you've made unless you give them written permission. And while those rules are very useful in protecting authors and artists, and especially the Walt Disney Corporation, they also have the downside of making stories less accessible and therefore hampering collaborative storytelling. When Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, he didn't have to request permission from someone who originally came up with the Christian concept of hell, because that story belonged not to a single author, but to all of Christendom. Now you yourself are welcome to create a spin-off of the Divine Comedy, no permission needed, because that book is in the public domain. But unlike the concept of hell, this is a novel, and its lineage is written down. Everyone will know it's based on this one specific work, the Divine Comedy, and if they feel like doing research, they'll be able to find their own copy of the original and look up exactly how many liberties you've taken with the source material. So, we have science challenging the role of myths as ideological narratives used to understand the world. We have fiction eliminating the need for a basis of assumed truth in all the stories that we tell. And we have canonicity, which allows us to identify who created the work and how it's changed. Given all of this, it's sort of easy to say that It was progress that killed myths. That it's a form of story humans simply don't feel the need to tell anymore, for a variety of reasons. And because of that, barring some earth-shattering event that sets the species back a couple thousand years, myth will probably have to stay dead. So, I guess it's time to say goodbye to one of the oldest and most beloved forms of storytelling. Myth has died, and all we can do is mourn its loss. Okay, I hope you weren't taking that too seriously. You weren't really expecting me to let go of one of my favorite types of story that easily, were you? Because, honestly, I really don't think I need to. Yes, myths have changed, that's true. The stories of the gods and heroes from antiquity may no longer serve as explanations for natural phenomena, but their lasting impact on culture remains undeniable. Every time you refer to a Pandora's box, an Achilles heel, or a Herculean effort, you're invoking a cultural legacy thousands of years old. Myths will never completely go away because they've become part of the collective consciousness, serving as a wellspring of inspiration for creatives the world over. Ancient Japanese gods and spirits show up in such diverse modern anime as Spirited Away, Death Note, and Yokai Watch. Norse gods like Thor and Loki have become some of the most famous characters in the world with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How many times have we seen Cupid show up as the special guest in the Valentine's Day episode of cartoon shows? And who could forget that seminal 2011 classic, Nickelodeon's House of Anubis? But the impact of ancient mythology is hardly limited to simply reimagining mythical figures as characters. The plot beats of ancient stories can be tweaked and given a new coat of paint to replay ageless dramas with a fresh cast of characters. The way Frankenstein is based on the myth of Prometheus, and Moulin Rouge is based on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Or the personalities of archetypal figures can be used as the basis for entirely new characters. Think of any fictional pantheons that have a love goddess and a trickster god. Probably most famously, comic book heroes are often referred to as modern mythology, and the similarities are hard to ignore. Beings with godlike powers, sometimes as with Thor and Loki, actual mythological deities, each with their own theme and emblem, who fight to protect or destroy the world, whose canon is forever shifting. Sounds like mythology to me. But they're missing a few things. Firstly, we know that their creators and their lineage are recorded. Secondly, they aren't free for anyone to use. And thirdly, nobody actually believes in them. They're much less modern mythology, and more the metaphorical gods of the American zeitgeist, if anything. But that's just how the legacy of myth has lived on. Where are all the new myths? The kind with no author, no traceable lineage? Okay, you humans aren't really dreaming up new gods so much anymore, but you're still participating in the old oral tradition. You come up with other tales, cryptids that lurk in the woods and caves in the bottom of Loch Ness, urban legends that totally happened to your roommate's cousin's friend, all pass through word of mouth over the course of decades with no known originator or verification. Some of them, like tales of friendly alien encounters, are just intriguing, but the vast majority are also supposed to be frightening. Because, just like myths, a lot of scary stories exist to explain the world around you. Why you should be scared of dark places and strangers, why nobody enters that abandoned building, where that weird stain on the school carpet came from. And unlike myths, scary stories are thriving. Creepypastas have been all over the internet practically since it existed, most passed from person to person with no central canon, many with no clear source. It started with email chain letters forwarded by superstitious uncles and grandmothers, and eventually gave way to creatures like Slender Man, who've inspired actual violent crimes by believers. And while we know where Slender Man came from, we still don't know where the original photo of the backrooms was taken, or who the person in the original photo of Jeff the Killer really was. Intriguingly, the most similar thing we might have to our own mythology now might be conspiracy theories. Not the mainstream ones, but the ones that are really out there. After all, what's a cabal of all-powerful shape-shifting lizard people if not a pantheon of malevolent gods? Conspiracy theories like these show not just a similarity to ancient mythology in terms of its followers sincerely believing in it, but also in the way that sincere belief can be twisted to do harm. Still, there are some important differences here. These conspiracy theorists don't worship the gods they believe in, but seek to destroy them instead, and they aren't fundamental to an entire culture, just a small subculture. And I know none of this is exactly what we described when we were defining myth, but that elder type of mythology is still out there too. For instance, during World War II, certain Melanesian tribes with little exposure to the outside world interpreted the cargo drops from Allied planes as signs of favor from the spirits. These cargo cults, as they became known, began worshipping figures such as a mythical American soldier called John Frum, as well as Prince Philip of the United Kingdom. These religions still exist to this day, with entire generations of children presumably raised in the faith. And, while I don't know for sure whether they've developed complex mythology around these beliefs, I think it's a pretty safe guess. Mythology just seems to be a part of being human. So, myth in the classic sense might basically be dead, but that doesn't mean you aren't still engaging in a version of it. Every time you invoke one of the old mythological figures, every time you form the next link in the chain of a rumor, every time you speculate baselessly about the true nature of things, you're participating in one of the oldest storytelling traditions of all, myth. And someday, perhaps, in the far distant future, your ancestors will look back on the strange stories you told and believed and allowed to inform your worldview with the same sense of awe that you feel for the gods of old. One of the most interesting truths about all fiction, though, no matter how fantastical, it has its roots in reality. All those old ideological narratives, the stories about how the sun travels across the sky because it's the wheel of Apollo's chariot, or how the earth and the sky are separate from each other because a giant pushed them apart, all early human attempts to rationalize a reality that they were observing. But those early humans were comparatively limited in how much of the world they even could observe. These days, you can observe a whole lot more of it if you have the tools. There are so many new stories to tell, so much speculating left to do, provided you can see the parts of your world that aren't so easily observed. Normally, that means years of study and schooling, but it doesn't have to. Our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can make all of that easier and more fun than it's ever been before. Brilliant really has been helping me broaden my horizons. I can always go to the site, click into a class, pick up where I left off, and take in a bite-sized piece of the fundamentals I've been missing. Whether it's maths, science, physics, anything and everything STEM, Brilliant has something for you. Lately for me, it was Brilliant's Thinking in Code class, which I feel is oddly appropriate for me. I can really feel it just opening up a whole new world to me that I had almost no idea was there before. Slowly but surely, as I educate myself in this way, the AI revolution isn't looking quite so intimidating anymore. And to be perfectly honest, it doesn't even really feel like studying. A lot of what you do on Brilliant might be better classified as mini-games. Look how interactive and fun these are. This one even has robots. Because Brilliant is so simple, moves at your pace, and starts at the very fundamentals, this is actually something that's really sticking for me. Almost like a personal tutor or coach. A legitimate, accessible, affordable, easy education, even for someone like me, with my head in the clouds and my face ever buried in fiction. And the best part? You can start for free. Visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry or click the link in the description to get your first 30 days for free. The first 200 Tale Foundry fans to sign up for a yearly subscription to Brilliant will get 20% off, so definitely hurry. Those slots are going to fill up fast. Again, visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry to get your first 30 days for free and 20% off a year subscription. Don't let something as simple as a lack of education hold you back. Try this out for free and be as brilliant as I know that you can be. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!